Captain Sarah Martinez had always been different from other pilots. While her colleagues spent their downtime in the officers' club sharing war stories, she preferred the solitude of the hangar, running her hands along the weathered aluminum skin of her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The Warthog, as it was lovingly called, wasn't the prettiest bird in the sky, but it was tough, reliable, and had saved more ground troops than any other aircraft in the Air Force inventory. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, Sarah arrived at Nellis Air Force Base before dawn, as was her custom. The Nevada desert was still cool, painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun began its climb over the distant mountains. She had been assigned to flight tail number 78-0691, a designation that meant nothing to her at the time but would soon send shockwaves through the highest levels of military command. The pre-flight inspection revealed nothing unusual. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines hummed with their characteristic whine, the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon was properly secured, and all systems showed green across the board. Sarah had no reason to suspect that this aircraft had been officially listed as destroyed in action over Afghanistan 3 years earlier, or that she herself was supposedly dead according to classified military records. As she strapped herself into the titanium bathtub that served as the A-10's cockpit, Sarah reviewed her mission briefing one final time. It was supposed to be a routine close air support exercise with ground forces operating in the Northern Training Range. The scenario was simple: provide air cover for a simulated convoy under attack, identify and eliminate hostile targets, and return to base. She had flown similar missions hundreds of times, both in training and in combat zones overseas. What made this morning different wasn't the mission itself, but the observer who had quietly joined the control tower staff. Colonel James Whitfield, a man with silver hair and steel-gray eyes, watched through binoculars as Sarah's Warthog rolled onto the active runway. Whitfield knew things about tail number 78-0691 that he wished he could forget. He also knew that Sarah Martinez was about to become either a liability or an asset in a game far more dangerous than any military exercise. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Sarah pushed the throttles forward. The twin engines roared to life, and the heavily armed aircraft began its lumbering acceleration down the runway. Unlike the sleek F-16s and F-22s that shared the base, the A-10 was built for punishment, not speed. It climbed slowly but steadily into the crystalline Nevada sky, leaving a trail of heat shimmer in the morning air. 43 miles to the northeast, Major Tom Viper Rodriguez was leading a four-ship formation of F-16 Fighting Falcons on a routine combat air patrol. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran with over 3,000 flight hours and a reputation for seeing details that other pilots missed. When the radar contact appeared on his scope, tagged as a friendly A-10 Warthog, he initially paid it little attention. Warthogs and Vipers rarely shared the same airspace during exercises, but it wasn't unheard of. It was his wingman, Captain Lisa Reaper Johnson, who first noticed something odd. Through her heads-up display, she could make out the distinctive silhouette of the approaching A-10, and something about its tail number made her do a double-take. She had memorized hundreds of aircraft tail numbers during her career, but this one triggered a memory that didn't make sense. "Viper lead, this is Reaper 2, she called over the radio. "That Warthog, can you make out her tail number?" Rodriguez adjusted his position to get a better view of the approaching aircraft. Through the crystal-clear desert air, he could clearly see the black numerals painted on the A-10's vertical stabilizer, 78-0691. The number hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He had seen that tail number before, painted on a memorial wall in a classified briefing room at Langley Air Force Base. It belonged to an aircraft that had been shot down over Afghanistan, along with its pilot, Captain Sarah Martinez. "Control, this is Viper lead." Rodriguez's voice carried a tension that immediately caught the attention of everyone on the radio frequency. "I need you to confirm the identity of the A-10 currently operating in Sector 7. The response from Nellis Control was routine and matter-of-fact. "Viper lead, that's Warthog 76, pilot Sarah Martinez, conducting CAS training exercise in the Northern Range. No conflicts with your current mission." Rodriguez felt his blood turn to ice water. He was staring at an aircraft and pilot that, according to every classified database he had access to, no longer existed. Captain Sarah Martinez had been killed in action when her A-10 was destroyed by enemy surface-to-air missiles during a combat mission over the Hindu Kush Mountains. He had attended the memorial service himself. Sarah, unaware of the growing confusion in the F-16 formation, continued toward her assigned training area. The desert landscape stretched endlessly below her, broken only by the occasional dirt road or abandoned mining operation. She was running through her weapon systems checks when an unexpected voice crackled through her headset. Warthog 76, this is Viper Lead. Request you state your full name and service number for verification. The request was unusual, but not unprecedented. Sarah assumed it was part of some broader security exercise she hadn't been briefed on. Viper Lead, this is Captain Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, service number 123-45-6789, currently assigned to the 66th Weapons Squadron out of Nellis. There was a long silence on the radio that stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Rodriguez finally responded, his voice carried an edge that made Sarah's instincts prickle with unease. Warthog 76, be advised you are to immediately alter course to heading 270 and proceed directly to Nellis for emergency landing. Do not deviate from this instruction. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Emergency landing procedures meant something was seriously wrong with her aircraft, even if she couldn't identify what it might be. She began scanning her instruments more carefully, looking for any sign of mechanical failure or system malfunction. Everything appeared normal, but she knew better than to question a direct order from a flight leader. Viper Lead, Warthog 76 turning to heading 270. Can you advise the nature of the emergency? Rodriguez found himself in an impossible position. How do you tell a pilot that she's flying a dead woman's airplane? How do you explain that her very existence violates everything the official record states? How do you begin to unravel a mystery that shouldn't exist? Warthog 76, maintain radio silence and proceed as directed. Viper formation will escort you back to base. As Sarah banked her aircraft toward the south, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in the past few minutes. The tone of the radio communications, the unexpected escort, and the abrupt cancellation of her training mission all pointed to a situation far more complex than a simple mechanical problem. She had been in the military long enough to recognize the signs of a developing crisis, even when she didn't understand its source. Below them, the Nevada desert continued its ancient dance with the sun and wind, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the sky above. Somewhere in a basement office at the Pentagon, classified computers were already beginning to flag an impossibility in their databases. An aircraft that shouldn't exist was flying with a pilot who should be dead, and the carefully constructed walls of secrecy that had protected Operation Ghostwing for 3 years were beginning to crack. Colonel Whitfield watched the formation approach Nellis through his binoculars, his weathered face showing no emotion despite the storm of calculations running through his mind. He had hoped this day would never come, but contingency plans had been in place since the operation's inception. Sarah Martinez was about to learn that some secrets are so dangerous that they can kill the people who stumble upon them, and that the line between ally and enemy can shift as quickly as desert sand in a windstorm. The tower began clearing all other aircraft from Nellis airspace as the strange formation approached. Ground crews were quietly directed away from the main runway, and security personnel began taking positions around the airfield. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen away from curious eyes and recording devices. Sarah completed her final approach and touched down on runway 03, her Warthog's main gear hitting the concrete with the characteristic thump of a successful landing. As she rolled out and began her taxi to the assigned parking area, she could see an unusual amount of activity around the base operations center. Military police vehicles were positioned at strategic locations, and several officers she didn't recognize were waiting near her assigned parking spot. As she shut down her engines and began her post-flight checklist, Sarah Martinez had no idea that her routine training flight had just triggered the most significant security breach investigation in modern Air Force history. The tail number painted on her aircraft was about to open a door to secrets that reached into the darkest corners of military black operations, and her own survival would depend on navigating a maze of deception that had been 3 years in the making. The debriefing room at Nellis Air Force Base was deliberately stark and intimidating. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table with 4 chairs created an atmosphere designed to make people uncomfortable and more likely to reveal information they might otherwise keep hidden. Sarah Martinez sat across from 3 officers she had never seen before, their uniforms bearing insignia that didn't match any unit she recognized. Colonel Whitfield entered the room without introducing himself, carrying a thick manila folder that he placed on the table but didn't open. His steel-gray eyes studied Sarah's face with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. Behind him came 2 other men in civilian clothes, their bearing and haircuts marking them as military despite their attempts at anonymity. Captain Martinez, Whitfield began, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of classified operations, we need to discuss your flight this morning, specifically the aircraft you were flying. Sarah maintained her composure, though confusion flickered across her features. Sir, I was assigned tail number 78-0691 for a routine training exercise. The aircraft performed normally throughout the flight, and I detected no mechanical issues or system failures. Tell me about your assignment history, Whitfield continued, ignoring her response. Where were you stationed before Nellis? The question seemed routine enough, but Sarah sensed an undercurrent she couldn't identify. I was deployed to Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan for 8 months, flying close air support missions with the 25th Fighter Squadron. Before that, I was stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona for pilot training and initial A-10 certification. One of the civilian investigators leaned forward, consulting notes that Sarah couldn't see. Captain, our records show some discrepancies in your deployment timeline. Can you be more specific about your last mission in Afghanistan? Sarah's brow furrowed as she tried to understand where this line of questioning was leading. My final mission was a close air support operation in the Kunar province. We were providing cover for a convoy that had come under attack from insurgent forces positioned in the mountain ridges. The mission was successful, and all friendly forces returned safely to base. Whitfield opened the manila folder and removed a single sheet of paper, which he placed face down on the table between them. Captain Martinez, I'm going to ask you to look at this document carefully and tell me if you recognize it. He flipped the paper over to reveal an official Air Force casualty report. Sarah's eyes immediately went to the name at the top of the form, Captain Sarah Elizabeth Martinez. The document detailed how she had been killed in action when her A-10 Thunderbolt II was shot down by enemy forces while conducting a combat mission over Afghanistan. The date of death was listed as 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days earlier. Sarah stared at the document in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. According to the official record, she had died in the same aircraft she had been flying that morning. The tail number 78-0691 was specifically mentioned as being destroyed along with its pilot. There has to be some mistake, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm obviously not dead. I've been flying missions continuously since that deployment. I have flight logs, maintenance records, personnel evaluations, do you? Whitfield interrupted. Because our investigation suggests that Captain Sarah Martinez died in combat as described in that report. The aircraft you flew this morning was officially destroyed and written off as a total loss. Yet somehow, both you and that aircraft appeared on our flight line this morning, as if neither of you had ever left. Sarah felt the room beginning to spin slightly. The implications of what Whitfield was suggesting were impossible to accept, yet the evidence was right there in front of her. She tried to remember specific details from the months following her supposed death, but found that her memories were strangely vague and inconsistent. I need to see my personnel file, she said, fighting to maintain her composure. There has to be documentation of my continued service, my medical records, my performance reports. The second civilian investigator spoke for the first time, his voice flat and emotionless. Captain, we've already reviewed all available records. According to every database we've accessed, you don't exist. No service record, no medical file, no security clearance, no financial records. It's as if Captain Sarah Martinez vanished from the system 3 years ago and was replaced by someone using her identity. Sarah's hands began to tremble as the full scope of the situation became clear. Someone had erased her official existence and replaced it with a death certificate, but the erasure had been incomplete. The aircraft she flew still bore the tail number of a supposedly destroyed plane, and her own memories of continued service contradicted the official record. What are you suggesting? She asked, though she was beginning to understand the answer. Colonel Whitfield leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction carefully. We're suggesting, Captain, that you're either part of an elaborate deception, or you're the victim of one. Either way, your presence here today represents a significant security breach that requires immediate investigation. Outside the debriefing room, Major Rodriguez paced the hallway, still trying to process what he had witnessed during the morning's encounter. He had called his squadron commander immediately after landing, and, within an hour, investigators from multiple agencies had descended on Nellis like locusts. The speed of their response suggested that this situation was far more serious than a simple case of mistaken identity. Captain Johnson approached him with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. Tom, I've been doing some digging. That tail number, 78-0691, it's not just listed as destroyed. It's classified at levels I can't even access. Whatever that aircraft was involved in before it supposedly got shot down, it was deep black ops. Rodriguez accepted the coffee gratefully, though his stomach was too knotted to consider drinking it. "Lisa, I was at Sarah Martinez's memorial service. I saw her parents receive the flag. I watched her squadron mates give speeches about her service and sacrifice. How is she sitting in that room right now, very much alive?" "Maybe she's not," Johnson said quietly. "Maybe someone else is wearing her face and flying her plane." The suggestion hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. In an era of advanced medical procedures and sophisticated identity theft, the possibility of someone successfully impersonating a dead pilot wasn't entirely far-fetched. But the technical and logistical challenges of such a deception would require resources and expertise available only to the most classified government operations. Back in the debriefing room, Sarah was beginning to piece together fragments of memory that didn't align with the timeline she had always believed. She remembered the mission over Afghanistan clearly, the mountain ridges, the insurgent positions, the successful completion of the air support operation. But the memories of what happened afterward were increasingly vague and dreamlike. "I remember being debriefed after that mission," she said slowly, more to herself than to her interrogators. "But I can't remember who debriefed me, or where it took place. The faces are blurry, and the location keeps changing in my memory." Whitfield exchanged glances with the civilian investigators, a silent communication that suggested they were familiar with the symptoms Sarah was describing. "Captain, have you ever heard of Operation Ghostwing?" Sarah shook her head, but even as she did, she felt a strange recognition stirring in the back of her mind. The name triggered something, not a clear memory, but an emotional response that she couldn't identify. Ghostwing was a classified program designed to test the limits of pilot survival and recovery in hostile territory, Whitfield explained. The program involved staged crash scenarios, memory conditioning, and identity protection protocols that allowed pilots to continue operating even after their official deaths. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Staged crash scenarios. Memory conditioning. Identity protection protocols. Each phrase unlocked fragments of suppressed memories that came flooding back in disjointed pieces. She remembered being pulled from her aircraft after what she thought was a successful landing, but the faces of her rescuers were obscured by surgical masks. She remembered medical procedures that she had been told were routine post-deployment health checks, but which involved equipment and techniques she didn't recognize. "You're saying I was part of some kind of experiment?" she asked, her voice hollow with growing understanding. "We're saying that Captain Sarah Martinez died in combat as officially reported," Whitfield replied. "What we need to determine is who you are, and why you believe you're her." Sarah's world was collapsing around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Everything she remembered about her life, her service, her identity, was being systematically dismantled by people who seemed to know more about her own history than she did. The aircraft she had flown that morning was supposedly destroyed years ago, yet she had clear memories of flying it dozens of times since her supposed death. The tail number that had triggered this investigation was painted on a plane that shouldn't exist, piloted by a woman who officially didn't exist either. "I need proof," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "If what you're telling me is true, there has to be evidence. Medical records from these procedures you're describing, documentation of this Ghostwing operation, something that proves I'm not who I think I am." Whitfield closed the manila folder and stood up, his expression unreadable. "Captain, or whoever you are, you're about to learn that some secrets are so deeply buried that proving they exist becomes impossible. Operation Ghostwing was terminated 3 years ago after it was determined that the risks outweighed the benefits. All documentation was classified at the highest levels and sealed indefinitely." As the interrogators filed out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with her shattered sense of reality, she tried to focus on the one thing she was certain of: she was alive, she was a pilot, and she had flown that morning in an aircraft that performed exactly as she expected it to. Everything else, her name, her history, her memories, might be lies constructed by people with agendas she couldn't understand, but her skills and instincts as a pilot remained intact. What she didn't know was that in a secure communication center buried beneath the Pentagon, encrypted messages were already being transmitted to classified facilities around the world. The Ghostwing protocol had been triggered for the first time since the program's official termination, and Sarah Martinez, whoever she really was, had become the center of a crisis that threatened to expose one of the military's darkest and most controversial experiments in human manipulation and control. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been waiting in her car outside Nellis Air Force Base for 3 hours when her secure phone finally buzzed with the message she had been dreading. The text contained only 5 words: "Ghostwing protocol activated immediately." Her hands shook as she read the message again, hoping she had misunderstood its meaning. 3 years ago, Dr. Vasquez had been the chief psychologist for Operation Ghostwing, a program so classified that even she hadn't known its full scope until it was too late to stop what they had set in motion. When the program was officially terminated, she had hoped never to hear those words again. But, here she was, driving through the gates of Nellis with credentials that granted her access to levels of security most people never knew existed. Inside the base medical facility, Sarah Martinez sat on an examination table while a Air Force doctor drew blood samples and conducted tests she didn't understand. The past 6 hours had been a blur of interrogations, medical procedures, and psychological evaluations that left her feeling like a laboratory specimen rather than a human being. "Captain Martinez," Dr. Vasquez said as she entered the examination room, her voice carrying a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the harsh questioning Sarah had endured all day. "I'm Dr. Vasquez. I've been asked to speak with you about your experiences and help clarify some of the confusion surrounding your situation." Sarah looked up at the middle-aged woman with tired eyes. "Are you here to tell me I'm crazy, doctor? Because that seems to be the general consensus around here." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a chair and sat down at eye level with Sarah, a gesture that immediately put her at ease. "I'm here to help you understand what happened to you, Sarah. And I want you to know that you're not crazy, and you're not imagining things. What you've experienced is the result of a program that should never have been allowed to exist." The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over her. Relief that someone was finally acknowledging her reality, and terror at what that acknowledgement might mean. "Tell me about Ghostwing," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. Dr. Vasquez took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to reveal would fundamentally change Sarah's understanding of her own life. Ghostwing was an experimental program designed to create pilots who could continue operating in hostile territory even after their official deaths. The theory was that if an enemy believed they had killed a particular pilot, they would stop looking for that person, allowing for deep cover operations and intelligence gathering. Sarah felt pieces of a horrible puzzle beginning to fall into place. "You faked my death." "We did more than that," Dr. Vasquez admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "We erased your official existence and created a new identity framework that would allow you to continue operating without triggering any security databases. The process involved memory conditioning techniques that blurred the line between your actual experiences and implanted recollections." The room seemed to tilt around Sarah as the full implications hit her. "You experimented on me. You messed with my mind, made me forget parts of my own life, and replaced them with false memories." Dr. Vasquez nodded, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. The memory conditioning was designed to be temporary and reversible, but the termination of the program happened so abruptly that we never had the opportunity to properly restore the original memory patterns for the test subjects. "Test subjects," Sarah repeated, the clinical term hitting her like a slap. "How many others were there?" 17 pilots in total across all branches of service. You were the only one who showed complete psychological integration with the conditioning process. The others either rejected the implanted memories or suffered complete psychological breaks that required extensive rehabilitation. Sarah stood up and began pacing the small examination room, her mind racing to process everything she was learning. "What happened to them? The other pilots?" Dr. Vasquez hesitated before answering. 3 were medically retired with full disability benefits. 2 were reassigned to desk jobs after partial memory restoration. The rest? She paused, struggling with the weight of her revelations. The rest didn't survive the process. The casual way Dr. Vasquez mentioned the deaths of 12 people made Sarah's blood run cold. She was beginning to understand that she was dealing with people who viewed human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of their experimental goals. "Why didn't you restore my memories when the program ended?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You had become the most successful test case we'd ever produced," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Your psychological integration was so complete that attempting to reverse the conditioning carried an estimated 90% chance of permanent psychological damage or death. The decision was made to leave you as you were and monitor your status through periodic medical checkups disguised as routine evaluations." Sarah stopped pacing and stared at Dr. Vasquez with growing anger. "You've been watching me for 3 years? Studying me like some kind of lab rat?" "The monitoring was minimal and non-intrusive," Dr. Vasquez said defensively. "We needed to ensure that the conditioning remained stable and that you weren't experiencing any adverse psychological effects. What about my family? Sarah asked, a new horror recurring to her. They think I'm dead. They had a funeral, grieved for me, and moved on with their lives while you kept me alive as part of your sick experiment. Dr. Vasquez looked down at her hands, the weight of her complicity finally overwhelming her professional detachment. Your family was told that your remains were unrecoverable due to the circumstances of your death. They were given a memorial service with full military honors, and your parents received your life insurance benefits and survivor's pension. The room fell silent except for the humming of the fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah felt as though her entire world had been revealed to be a carefully constructed lie, maintained by people who saw her as nothing more than a valuable piece of military equipment to be preserved and studied. What about the aircraft I've been flying? She asked. The maintenance records, the flight logs, the other pilots and ground crew who've worked with me? All part of the conditioning framework, Dr. Vasquez explained. The aircraft you flew this morning was indeed tail number 78-0691, but it was never actually destroyed in Afghanistan. Your supposed crash was staged using a different aircraft, and 78-0691 was secretly transferred to a classified maintenance facility where it was kept in service specifically for your use. Sarah sank back onto the examination table, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception that had shaped her life for the past 3 years. The other people I've worked with, my squadron mates, my commanding officers, are they all part of this conspiracy? Most of them don't know the truth, Dr. Vasquez said. They were told you were part of a classified test program that required compartmentalized information sharing. Only a few key personnel were aware of your true status and history. A knock on the examination room door interrupted their conversation. Colonel Whitfield entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim and urgent. Dr. Vasquez, we have a problem, he said, glancing at Sarah before focusing on the psychologist. The Pentagon has been notified of today's incident, and there are people asking questions that we're not prepared to answer. The directive has come down to implement immediate containment protocols. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. In military parlance, containment protocols usually meant eliminating security threats by whatever means necessary. What exactly does that mean for me? She asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Whitfield's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained authoritative. It means, Captain, that you've become a liability that certain people believe needs to be permanently resolved. Your continued existence proves that Ghost Wing violated numerous international treaties regarding human experimentation and military ethics. Dr. Vasquez stood up, her professional demeanor cracking completely. James, we can't let them do this. Sarah is an innocent victim in all of this. She never consented to be part of the program, and she doesn't deserve to pay the price for our mistakes. The decision isn't mine to make, Whitfield replied. Orders are already being transmitted, and we have perhaps 6 hours before a Black Ops team arrives to implement the containment directive. Sarah felt a strange calm descending over her as the full scope of her situation became clear. She was expendable collateral damage in a cover-up designed to protect the people who had destroyed her life and the lives of 16 other pilots. But she was also a trained combat pilot with skills and instincts honed through years of flying in hostile environments. Dr. Vasquez, she said, her voice steady and determined, can you restore my original memories? The psychologist looked surprised by the question. Theoretically, yes, but the process would be extremely dangerous. The conditioning has been in place for 3 years, and attempting to reverse it could cause permanent brain damage or death. What are my chances of survival if I do nothing? Sarah asked. Whitfield answered bluntly. 0. The containment team will make your death look like an accident, probably a training mishap or mechanical failure during flight operations. Sarah nodded, understanding her options clearly. She could submit to execution by people who viewed her as a failed experiment, or she could risk everything on a dangerous medical procedure that might restore her true identity and memories. How long would the memory restoration take? She asked Dr. Vasquez. Several hours of intensive neural stimulation therapy, assuming we can access the equipment and facilities necessary for the procedure. Sarah looked at both of them with the steady gaze of a pilot who had made countless life or death decisions in combat. Then, we better get started, because I'm not going down without a fight. What none of them knew was that their conversation was being monitored through sophisticated listening devices that had been installed throughout the medical facility. 3,000 miles away in a secure bunker beneath Washington, D.C., a man in an expensive suit was already issuing orders to accelerate the containment timeline. Captain Sarah Martinez, whoever she really was, had just become the most hunted person in the United States military. The abandoned medical facility 40 miles northeast of Nellis Air Force Base had been closed for budget reasons 2 years earlier, but Dr. Vasquez knew it still contained the specialized neurological equipment necessary for the memory restoration procedure. Getting Sarah there without triggering the electronic surveillance systems monitoring the base would require help from someone with access and authority that extended beyond normal military channels. Major Rodriguez had been wrestling with his conscience for 6 hours when Dr. Vasquez approached him in the officers' club. The bar was nearly empty, with most pilots either on duty or sleeping off the exhaustion of desert training exercises. Rodriguez sat alone at a corner table, nursing a beer that had long since gone warm. "Major Rodriguez," Dr. Vasquez said as she slid into the seat across from him, "I believe we met briefly this morning during the initial debriefing. I need to speak with you about Captain Martinez." Rodriguez looked up at the woman who had introduced herself as a military psychologist, noting the stress lines around her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Doctor, I think I've told everyone everything I know about this morning's encounter. Sarah Martinez is flying an aircraft that was supposedly destroyed, using an identity that was supposedly killed in action. Beyond that, I'm as confused as everyone else. Major, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully because Captain Martinez's life depends on what you decide to do with this information. Over the next 20 minutes, Dr. Vasquez explained the basics of Operation Ghostwing, carefully omitting the most disturbing details of the psychological conditioning and experimentation. She told Rodriguez enough to make him understand that Sarah was an innocent victim of a classified program gone wrong, and that powerful people were now trying to eliminate her to protect their own careers and reputations. Rodriguez listened in stunned silence, his military training telling him to reject such an outlandish story while his instincts as a pilot told him that Dr. Vasquez was telling the truth. He had seen the confusion and fear in Sarah's eyes during their brief radio contact that morning, and it hadn't seemed like the reaction of someone who was part of an elaborate deception. "What are you asking me to do?" he said finally. "Help us get her out of here," Dr. Vasquez replied. "There's a facility where I can attempt to restore her original memories and give her back her true identity. But we need someone with flight clearance and security access to make it possible." Rodriguez drained his beer and stared out the window at the flight line, where A-10s and F-16s sat silently under the desert stars. Everything in his training told him to report this conversation to his commanding officer and let the proper authorities handle the situation. But everything in his conscience told him that those same authorities were the ones who had created this nightmare in the first place. "If I help you," he said slowly, "and this goes wrong, my career is over. I'll be court-martialed, probably imprisoned, and definitely dishonored. My family will suffer, and my reputation will be destroyed." Dr. Vasquez nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was asking. "Major, if you don't help us, an innocent woman will be murdered by people who view her as nothing more than a security risk. The choice is yours, but you need to make it quickly." 2 hours later, Rodriguez found himself using his access codes to authorize a routine medical transport flight to evacuate what the paperwork described as a pilot suffering from acute psychological distress requiring specialized treatment at an off-base facility. The lies came surprisingly easily once he committed to the deception, and, within 30 minutes, a military ambulance was quietly departing Nellis with Sarah, Dr. Vasquez, and a collection of medical equipment that had been signed out for routine maintenance. The drive through the Nevada desert took place in complete silence, with Sarah staring out the window at the endless expanse of scrubland and mountains while Dr. Vasquez prepared the neurological stimulation equipment that would either restore her memories or kill her. The weight of her situation had settled over Sarah like a lead blanket, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, she felt a growing anger at the people who had stolen 3 years of her life for their twisted experiment. The abandoned medical facility looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie, with broken windows, peeling paint, and parking lots cracked by desert heat and winter frost. But the interior was surprisingly well preserved, and the electrical systems still functioned well enough to power the equipment Dr. Vasquez needed for the procedure. "Sarah, I need you to understand that what we're about to attempt has never been tried before," Dr. Vasquez said as she prepared the neural interface headset. "The original memory conditioning was designed to be irreversible, and trying to undo it is essentially experimental brain surgery without proper surgical facilities or backup medical support." Sarah settled into the medical chair that would serve as her treatment platform, her pilot's training allowing her to maintain calm in the face of extreme uncertainty. "Doctor, 3 days ago I thought I knew who I was, where I came from, and what my life meant. Today I learned that everything I believed was a lie constructed by people who used me as a test subject. At this point, I'd rather die as myself than live as someone else's experiment." The neural stimulation process began with low-level electrical impulses designed to activate the deep memory centers of Sarah's brain while bypassing the conditioning barriers that had been implanted 3 years earlier. Dr. Vasquez monitored her vital signs and brain activity through a collection of medical equipment that looked more like torture devices than healing instruments. "I'm seeing some initial response," Dr. Vasquez reported as Sarah's brainwave patterns began to shift on the monitoring screens. "Your neural pathways are starting to reorganize, but I'm also detecting significant stress patterns that suggest your mind is fighting the process." Sarah gritted her teeth as waves of disorientation and nausea washed over her. The electrical stimulation felt like having her brain slowly rewired while she remained conscious, and she could feel memories beginning to surface that didn't match anything she remembered about her life. "There's something else," she gasped between waves of neural stimulation. "I'm remembering things that don't make sense. Training exercises that never happened, people I've never met, conversations about missions that aren't in any official record." Dr. Vasquez increased the stimulation intensity, knowing that they were approaching the critical phase of the procedure. "That's your original personality beginning to reassert itself. The conditioning created false memory frameworks to support your new identity, but your true memories are still intact underneath." The breakthrough came suddenly and violently. Sarah's back arched in the medical chair as a flood of suppressed memories exploded through her consciousness like a dam bursting. She remembered the real mission over Afghanistan, the emergency landing after taking enemy fire, and the medical team that had sedated her before she could report back to her unit. She remembered waking up in a medical facility that looked nothing like any military hospital she had ever seen, with doctors who spoke in clinical terms about neural pathway modification and behavioral conditioning. She remembered trying to resist the procedures, fighting against the restraints and demanding to be returned to her unit, only to be sedated again and again until she stopped resisting. Most horrifying of all, she remembered the gradual erosion of her own identity as the conditioning took hold. Her memories of family, friends, and her life before the military became increasingly vague and dreamlike, replaced by implanted recollections that felt real but lacked the emotional depth of genuine experience. "My name isn't Sarah Martinez," she said, her voice hoarse from the strain of the procedure. My name is. She struggled to access memories that had been buried for 3 years under layers of psychological conditioning. "Take your time," Dr. Vasquez said gently. "The restoration process is still ongoing. Your brain is essentially rebuilding neural connections that were severed or modified during the original conditioning." "Jennifer," Sarah whispered, the name emerging from the depths of her restored memory like a precious artifact being pulled from underwater. "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm from Colorado, not Texas. I have a sister named Amy who teaches elementary school, and parents who run a small farm outside Denver." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. For 3 years, she had been living someone else's life, mourning someone else's family, and carrying someone else's dreams and aspirations. The real Sarah Martinez had been another ghost-wing test subject, one who hadn't survived the conditioning process, and her identity had been grafted onto Jennifer's mind like a psychological skin graft. "The aircraft," Jennifer said as more memories surfaced. "Tail number 78-0691 wasn't my plane. It belonged to Sarah Martinez, and they kept using it after she died to maintain the illusion that she was still alive." Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. The program needed a success story to justify its continued existence. "When Sarah Martinez died during conditioning, they transferred her identity to you because your psychological profile was similar enough to make the implantation believable." Jennifer felt a rage building inside her that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had been turned into a living memorial to a dead pilot, her own identity erased to support a lie that protected the careers of people who viewed human beings as disposable resources. "How many others were there like me?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "You're the only successful identity transfer we achieved," Dr. Vasquez admitted. The other attempts resulted in psychological fractures that required the subjects to be permanently institutionalized or killed, Jennifer finished, understanding the full scope of the atrocity that had been committed in the name of military advancement. Outside the abandoned medical facility, the sound of approaching helicopters began to echo across the desert landscape. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her monitoring equipment with an expression of growing alarm. "They found us," she said, beginning to quickly disconnect Jennifer from the neural stimulation devices. "We need to leave immediately." Jennifer struggled to sit up as the full weight of her restored memories settled into her consciousness. She was no longer the confused and compliant test subject who had walked into Nellis Air Force Base that morning. She was Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, a combat pilot who had been betrayed by her own military and turned into a living lie to protect the people who had destroyed her life. But, as the helicopters grew closer and the sound of military vehicles began to converge on their location, Jennifer realized that knowing the truth about her identity was only the beginning of her fight for survival. The people who had stolen her life would do anything to prevent the truth about Operation Ghostwing from becoming public, and they had the resources of the entire United States military at their disposal. The war for Jennifer Walsh's life was about to begin, and she was outnumbered by forces that would stop at nothing to bury their secrets along with anyone who threatened to expose them. The sound of rotor blades grew louder as 3 black helicopters approached the abandoned medical facility, their searchlights cutting through the desert darkness like laser beams seeking prey. Jennifer Walsh forced herself to stand despite the disorientation from the memory restoration procedure, her combat pilot instincts overriding the physical weakness that threatened to overwhelm her. "Is there another way out of this building?" she asked Dr. Vasquez, who was frantically packing the neurological monitoring equipment into portable cases. "Service tunnel in the basement," Dr. Vasquez replied, her hands shaking as she tried to save the data that documented Jennifer's memory restoration. "It connects to the old maintenance facility about half a mile east." "But, Jennifer, you're in no condition to run. The neural stimulation process has left your motor control systems unstable." Jennifer tested her balance and found that Dr. Vasquez was right. Her legs felt like rubber, and her vision occasionally blurred as her brain continued to process the restored memories. But she could hear vehicles approaching the facility from multiple directions, and she knew that capture meant death for all of them. "Doctor, how long before my motor functions stabilize?" "At least 6 hours, possibly longer. The brain needs time to fully integrate the restored neural pathways." Jennifer looked out the window at the approaching helicopters and made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the compliant Sarah Martinez who had existed for the past 3 years. "Then, we need to buy time and find another way to survive this." Major Rodriguez had been monitoring military communications from his quarters at Nellis when he heard the coded transmissions authorizing a Black Ops recovery mission to the coordinates he had provided for the medical transport. The realization that he had led Jennifer directly into a trap hit him like a punch to the stomach, and he knew he had only minutes to act before the containment team completed their mission. Without stopping to consider the consequences, Rodriguez ran to the flight line and used his emergency authorization codes to prep his F-16 for immediate takeoff. The ground crew questioned the unusual late-night flight request, but Rodriguez's rank and security clearance overrode their concerns. Within 20 minutes, he was airborne and racing toward the abandoned medical facility with no clear plan except to somehow interfere with the operation that was about to eliminate 3 innocent people. In the basement of the medical facility, Jennifer and Dr. Vasquez made their way through a maintenance tunnel that hadn't been used in years. The air was stale and thick with dust, and their flashlights revealed spider webs and debris that made progress slow and difficult. Above them, they could hear the sound of boots on the building's upper floors as the containment team began their systematic search. "Jennifer, there's something else you need to know about Operation Ghostwing," Dr. Vasquez said as they navigated the dark tunnel. "The program wasn't terminated because of ethical concerns. It was terminated because one of the test subjects escaped and tried to expose the project to Congress." Jennifer stopped moving, her restored memories suddenly providing context for Dr. Vasquez's revelation. "What happened to that pilot?" "He was killed in what was officially reported as a training accident 2 weeks after he reached out to a Senate Oversight Committee. But, before he died, he managed to transmit evidence of the program to several journalists and government watchdog organizations." "Then, why hasn't the story become public?" Dr. Vasquez's voice carried the weight of bitter experience. "Because the people running Ghostwing had contingency plans for that possibility. Every journalist who received the information suffered mysterious accidents or sudden career changes that discredited their ability to pursue the story. The government officials who tried to investigate found their security clearances revoked and their access to relevant documents blocked by national security classifications." Jennifer felt her anger crystallizing into something harder and more focused. She was beginning to understand that her survival would require more than simply escaping the immediate threat. The people responsible for Operation Ghostwing had the power and resources to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose their activities, and they had demonstrated their willingness to use those resources without hesitation. Dr. Vasquez, do you still have copies of the original Ghostwing research data? Some of it, hidden in encrypted files that I maintained for insurance purposes. But accessing it would require computer systems and security protocols that are far beyond what we have available. They reached the end of the maintenance tunnel and emerged into the abandoned facility's old garage, where several derelict vehicles provided temporary cover from the helicopters circling overhead. Jennifer's motor control was slowly improving, but she still felt like she was operating her body through a thick fog of neurological confusion. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel behind them, indicating that the containment team had discovered their escape route. Jennifer looked around the garage for anything that could be used as a weapon or tool, her pilot's training having included basic combat survival techniques that she hoped would be sufficient for their current situation. There, she pointed to an old maintenance truck that appeared to be in working condition. If we can get that started, we might be able to reach the main highway before they organize a proper pursuit. Dr. Vasquez looked skeptical. Jennifer, even if we escape tonight, where can we go? These people have access to every law enforcement database, every financial system, every communication network. They'll find us eventually. Not if we expose them first, Jennifer replied, her restored memories providing clarity about the scope of what they were facing. You said one pilot almost succeeded in revealing the program. What did he do differently than the others? He didn't try to work within the system, Dr. Vasquez said, understanding dawning in her voice. Instead of contacting government officials or established media outlets, he reached out directly to independent journalists and foreign news organizations that couldn't be controlled by domestic security agencies. The sound of the containment team moving through the tunnel was getting closer. Jennifer hot-wired the maintenance truck using skills she didn't remember learning, though her restored memories suggested that the real Sarah Martinez had been mechanically inclined. The engine coughed to life just as armed figures appeared in the tunnel entrance. Move! Jennifer shouted, gunning the truck's engine and crashing through the garage door in a shower of splintered wood and rusted metal. Bullets sparked off the truck's frame as they raced across the desert landscape, but the darkness and rough terrain made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Above them, Major Rodriguez was implementing his own desperate plan to interfere with the containment operation. Using his F-16's electronic warfare capabilities, he began jamming the communications frequencies being used by the helicopters and ground teams. The sophisticated military aircraft could overwhelm the Black Ops team's portable communication equipment, creating confusion and coordination problems that might give Jennifer and Dr. Vasquez the time they needed to escape. Viper 77, you are ordered to cease jamming operations immediately and return to base, came the terse command over Rodriguez's radio from someone claiming to be the base commander. Negative on that request, Rodriguez replied, knowing that his military career was effectively ending with those words. I'm experiencing equipment malfunctions that require troubleshooting at altitude. The maintenance truck bounced and lurched across the desert as Jennifer pushed it to speeds it was never designed to handle. Behind them, the helicopters were attempting to coordinate a pursuit, but their infrared sensors were being disrupted by Rodriguez's electronic countermeasures, making it difficult to maintain target acquisition in the vast darkness of the Nevada landscape. There's a small airfield about 15 miles southeast of here, Dr. Vasquez said, consulting a paper map she had found in the truck's glove compartment. It's used for civilian flight training and cargo operations. If we could somehow get access to an aircraft. Jennifer's restored memories included extensive knowledge of aircraft systems and emergency procedures that went far beyond what the Sarah Martinez identity had encompassed. She was beginning to understand that the memory conditioning hadn't just erased her original identity, it had also suppressed technical knowledge and abilities that were part of her authentic pilot training. Doctor, I need you to contact someone outside the military chain of command. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought off by the people running this cover-up. Dr. Vasquez pulled out her personal cell phone, knowing that using it would immediately reveal their location to anyone monitoring cellular communications. There's a journalist in London who has been investigating American military black operations. She published some of the leaked information from the pilot who escaped Ghostwing, though her stories were buried by legal challenges and disinformation campaigns. Call her, Jennifer said, making a decision that would either save their lives or get them all killed. Tell her everything, and make sure she understands that this story needs to be published simultaneously by multiple news organizations in different countries. As Dr. Vasquez made the call that would expose Operation Ghostwing to international scrutiny, Jennifer drove through the desert night toward an uncertain future. She no longer knew if she could trust her own government, her own military, or even her own memories. But she knew with absolute certainty that the people responsible for destroying her life and the lives of 16 other pilots would continue their experiments unless someone forced them to stop. The war for truth was about to go global, and Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, formerly the manufactured identity of Captain Sarah Martinez, was determined to make sure that this time, the victims of Operation Ghostwing would not be silenced by bullets or buried beneath classified documents. Behind them, the lights of the containment team's vehicles grew smaller in the distance, but Jennifer knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The people who had stolen her life had made one critical mistake: they had created a warrior when they thought they were creating a victim, and that warrior was about to bring their darkest secrets into the light.